Good evening and welcome to tonight's webinar session with Parkinson's Concierge and Parkinson's UK. We are delighted to have an exceptional audience and guests with us tonight, including Steve Ford, Professor Ray Chowdhury, and Professor Baz Bloem. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Russ. I was diagnosed with Parkinson's at the age of 40, 8 years ago. Last year, I underwent surgery, which is called DBS. Moving on to tonight's guests, we are delighted to welcome Professor Ray Chowdhury, who works out of King's College London. He's the medical director at the Parkinson's Foundation in the International Centre of Excellence at King's College. Welcome you, Professor Ray.
Hi, Russ, and hi, everybody. Thank you again for inviting me to be part of this faculty. Outstanding faculty with Professor Bloem and at hand, Steve Ford, friends and colleagues I've known for a very long time. And of course, Parkinson's Concierge, who's put up this platform. And I'd be very happy to take some questions and queries that you might have in relation to my own personal remit. I've worked with Parkinson's for very many years, since I became a registrar in the field in the mid-90s. And I've really devoted my career to working on non-motor aspects of Parkinson's from a period where very little was known and done about it in a holistic manner to a period now where it's become mainstream in virtually every congresses, and also it's in the radar of important charities like Parkinson's UK and Parkinson Foundation and so on. But more importantly, it's sort of led to a real translational angle to make a difference to people with Parkinson's. Now we have industries leading molecules to look at amelioration of non-motor signs and symptoms by new clinical trials. We have the year of the policymakers in FDA, in EMA, in NICE, also listening to the non-motor. And most importantly, our people with Parkinson's and their carers are also aware of these issues, which was actually flagged up by Dr. James Parkinson himself in 1817. So we are 203 years later on, but I'm glad that movement is happening, that people are listening, and that research is going on, which of course brings tangible benefit to people. So that would be my background that I wanted to provide for you.
Thank you, Professor Ray. It's an honor and a privilege to have you on our panel, agreeing to spare what is your own time. And as you say, we have a session with questions and answers coming up as well. Moving on, we're delighted to welcome Steve Ford, who is the CEO of Parkinson's UK. Steve's been with Parkinson's UK since 2005, so this makes it just over his 15th year. Over to you, Steve.
Brilliant, thank you, and it's really good to be on this this session tonight. I suppose just a bit of context as to what Parkinson's UK's focus is on, and you know, it really is about trying to address the priorities that are identified by the Parkinson's community. So it is about accelerating breakthroughs in research, and as a charity, really proud of the way that we have transformed the way charities go about doing research, our virtual biotech concept, the way we're looking at changing the way that clinical trials are done by bringing people together all over the world to share data. The work we're doing to encourage people to get involved in research studies through our Take Part Hub. So research is really important, but so is support. Better support is a real priority. So, you know, as a charity, we provide lots of information, but we've got a really exciting vision to make sure that everybody at the point of diagnosis in their clinic is being signposted to a really fantastic, proactive, personalized information support service that people and their families can use throughout their whole experience with Parkinson's. We work in a really innovative way, I think, as a charity with our fantastic health community. We created something called the Excellence Network, which is a way of the charity working with leading health professionals to really identify what good practice looks like and to spread it across the UK, recognising that the NHS doesn't really make Parkinson's a priority. So we need to provide that leadership. A real strong focus on exercise. That's been an emerging theme. Lots of work we can talk about in that area. And then just the last priority, and this is what people with Parkinson's say all the time, what can we do to get Parkinson's understood? So just having that, being able to bring the voice of people with Parkinson's to raise awareness. We've got this TV campaign at the moment, Time for Can, that some people might have seen, but just our ongoing campaigns trying to change public attitudes and increase awareness. So, you know, it'd be great to perhaps explore some of those themes in more detail.
Fantastic, and thank you very much for joining us, Steve, and thank you for that introduction. Moving on, we have Professor Bas Bloem, who's joining us tonight. He's Professor of Movement Disorders in Neurology, and he joins us tonight from the Netherlands.
Thank you, Ross. Absolute delight to be here, and I will be brief. I can say that I was partially trained in England at the National Hospital for Neurology at Queen Square by Professor Andrew Lees, Professor Neil Quinn, Professor Kailas Bhatia. So I've always had strong feelings and strong camaraderie with colleagues in England, like Professor Chowdhury. I also have deep admiration for the work being done by Parkinson's UK, I think is leading the field when it comes to information provision and showing what a charity can do for the field. And wonderful to be here as a partner. The only thing I wanted to say is, like Ray Chowdhury, I started my career on a topic where people told me, oh, you're wasting your good time. You should do genetics. And I just decided to follow my heart and work on the role of patients and the role of the multidisciplinary team, like physiotherapy or exercise. And like non-motor symptoms, thanks to the work by Professor Chowdhury, very glad to see that topics like lifestyle interventions, multidisciplinary care, and the role of patients is now at the fore at many international conferences, and rightly so, may I say. So lovely to exchange some thoughts and ideas here with you all the way from the Netherlands. I just hope we can become world champion in football one day instead of the English. You've had it once at least, we've had it never. So that is my other main disclosure, and we'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Bas. And may I say it's an honor to have the likes of yourself, Steve, Ray, and so many dedicated professionals up and down the country, as well as worldwide, with interest in Parkinson's for the people like myself who's a Parkinson's sufferer. So, you know, from my heart, I'd say big thanks. We do have a set of questions that have come in prior to tonight's show. I'd also like to say to any of the viewers, feel free to leave any questions in the chat box, and we'll do our utmost to answer those. Before we go any further, for those of you who've watched previous webinars, you'll be familiar with what I'm about to say. But I do appreciate your time if you just bear with me. As we all know, these are very challenging times for us all, with the continued regional lockdowns, uncertainty about the effects on business and jobs, restriction of activities, social distancing rules, etc. It's likely to cause anxiety and stress to many, as well as the Parkinson's community as a whole. With more reliance on the helplines and the need to continue support wherever possible, has a tremendous reliance on the funds available. As we all know, the lockdown period has significantly affected those of us who had planned fundraising activities, whether that be running marathons, cycling events, and most of the major contributions to charities, etc. As we all know, it's been a tough summer, and a lot of those events had to be cancelled. It's important to remember that this has had a huge effect on the charities who rely so much on these funds to provide those ongoing services for us all. I therefore kindly ask you to consider offering a donation to Parkinson's UK to enable the fantastic support they continue to offer those services for us all. There should be a link in the description of tonight's event, and I believe that that should also be on your screen as we speak. So, over to a couple of pre-prepared questions. In no particular order, Professor Baz, what cutting-edge treatments do you feel are on the horizon?
Well, the shortest answer is, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, is that this is a time of hope for people living with Parkinson's. Like Professor Chowdhury, I've been in this field since the earliest days of my career, and I think there are many breakthroughs on the horizon. And I think we've seen in the Alzheimer field how many promises never lived up to their expectations. But I think that in my career, I will witness the arrival of the first treatment that will actually be able to slow down the progression of Parkinson's disease. And perhaps, if it's really active, maybe with time start to stop the progression. And if we then identify the disease very early, who knows that if we apply the treatment early, it may start to help prevent Parkinson's. But I think the most likely exciting development will be the arrival of the first disease-modifying treatment, slowing down progression. And if I may add, we published a paper in the Lancet Neurology in September last year that stirred a lot of attention, where we showed that exercise 3 times a week for 30 minutes at about 80% of your maximum cardiac output, your maximum heart rate, helped to stabilize the motor symptoms of Parkinson's. Whereas a control group that merely engaged in stretching exercises declined over time, as you would expect in a progressive condition like Parkinson's. And our latest research, which wasn't published in the Lancet paper, but what we've now analyzed is we've done brain scans before and after the intervention in both the stretching group and the exercise group. And lo and behold, in people who merely did stretching, the brain shrank a little bit. The medical term is called atrophy. And we stopped the atrophy from happening with exercise. And the brain made new functional connections between the diseased basal ganglia and the cortex in those who engaged in exercise. Now, that's not synonymous to disease modification. I want to be careful and a good scientist, but I think this is as close as we have come so far to showing that we may have a disease-modifying intervention soon on the horizon.
Thank you very much for that explanation, and exciting times ahead. I too believe that these are very exciting times in advancement, not only of Parkinson's, but of many neurological conditions as well. So Steve, sorry, Ray, do you want to add to that?
Can I just make a comment to Professor Bloem's comment? So can I first applaud the work that Professor Bloem and many of his colleagues are now leading the world in. And he mentioned about exercise and physical activity and so on. It's very interesting, isn't it? The most robust evidence that we're now getting in terms of neuroprotection, neuromodulation, is coming not from molecules, but is coming from physical activity-based graded exercise type work that Baz has been leading. And it really goes to show how our understanding of the condition has changed and how we shouldn't just be focused on one area, but it needs to be a multimodal approach. And it really highlights that. And I just wanted to highlight that it's so important that the management also embraces this, in that it's not just altering medication, but you bring in lifestyle and related issues as integral to the clinical management of Parkinson's. Moving away from the very old-fashioned traditional approach that you come to a doctor or a nurse specialist, they give you some medications and you modify and go away, that's it. I think our understanding has changed, and this is why I think there might be so much hope for Parkinson's in future.
Fantastic. Steve, may I bring you in on this same subject, or would you like a different question?
No, I mean, I think that's a great question. You know, I'm not a scientist, so I won't answer in quite the same detail as Baz and Ray. But I think we, as a charity, think that these are really exciting times for research. But we do have a view that the model is not as efficient as it could be. I think the way charities always used to work was to say, let's fund fantastic university research, and let's assume that the discoveries that come out of that will be picked up by biotech companies, by pharmaceutical companies, that the drugs will be developed, trials will take place, and that will naturally lead to new treatments in clinic. And I think what we've seen in Parkinson's is industry, the biotech companies, the pharmaceutical companies, becoming more risk averse, recognizing there are problems in Parkinson's, perhaps compared to other, easier conditions, and have backed off. So that's why we created this kind of virtual biotech model, which is saying we need to be really kind of proactive in taking those most promising discoveries out of universities and kind of kickstarting them. Let's do that early drug development. Let's do the kind of early clinical trials. Let's put some money into the system. Let's de-risk those projects so that then the biotech companies, the pharmaceutical companies can come along with their millions of pounds to run the trials, knowing that we've kind of de-risked that. So, I think that's a really groundbreaking model that we've adopted. And we've got a portfolio of about 8 different projects now. And I hope that, combined with the scientific optimism of Baz and Ray, will accelerate the development of those new treatments.
Thank you so much. And if I may come back to you, Steve, just with another question that's come in prior to tonight's show. Obviously, winter's approaching fast. The nights are getting shorter. The nights are getting longer. The sunlight's getting shorter. With regard to people feeling isolated and let down, can I ask you what support the Parkinson's UK branch is providing to its members during the COVID extension and the continuous ongoing localized lockdowns?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, isn't it? And I know our local groups have been really struck by this inability to meet. I think what we have seen is, a number of groups get online and do that very quickly. And I know I've visited remotely some groups recently who have been doing stuff every single day, whether it's exercise groups or social groups, and that's fantastic. But we know that that's not what all our groups have been able to do. So that's a challenge. And, I think it's a real priority for us to help those groups rebuild as we come out of lockdown, hopefully next year. I think what I'd say to people, though, is that, okay, if the groups aren't working, remember that we still have our full network of helpline and local advisors, people, online communities, our forum, our Facebook groups. There are other ways in which people perhaps can get that advice, that mutual support that they're looking for if their local groups aren't online.
Thank you, Steve. Obviously, we're all social animals, and one thing that we do miss is this social interactions, the social connections. So that is obviously part and parcel of the local groups being there to support people who aren't actually managing very well through that.
Yeah, a massive psychological impact, for people missing out on those groups, the impact, the range of exercise provision that our groups kind of provide, and, the number of people who've said, and the number of health professionals who've said to me that the way they've really noticed that kind of deconditioning of people because they've not been able to be active in the same way. It's a real challenge.
Thank you. Professor Ray, what do you think is important? Sorry, I'll start again. Do you think it's important to undergo gene testing? Will that help at all in isolating potential breakthroughs?
It's a very important question. The first genes came to our attention in the early 90s with alpha-synuclein, and now we are almost 30 years on. And there are a large number of genetic mutations, both autosomal dominant and recessive, that's been described. It's my belief that a lot of these genetic mutations that's been described, and people call it Parkinson's disease, not actually Parkinson's disease, or do not conform to the typical Parkinsonism, so to speak. But there are some areas that are of great interest, particularly the glucocerebrosidase mutation, GBA. There seems to be reasonable evidence now from some very good quality trials from, for instance, Tony Shapira's group here in the UK and some others, showing that repurposing drugs which are already in clinical use, such as Ambroxol, might actually have the potential to protect people who carry these genes to go on to develop a manifest Parkinsonism, which might be associated with memory issues and so on. So I think in a small subset of people with Parkinson's, genomic medicine, which is a form of personalized medicine, really, precision medicine, can actually help. But I think such trials needs to be done, and I'm aware that there are molecules that are being looked at. I've just mentioned Ambroxol. It's another drug called Venglustat, which has been developed by Sanofi. And there are several other products also in LRRK2 mutations that people are looking at. So there is real chance that in this particular subgroup, if you're carrying these mutations, which are relatively common in Parkinson's in the context of the whole genetic pattern, there might be a role of genetics and treatment. But I think it's still not with us. We have a fair few years to go.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
And if I may add, Ross,
Yeah.
Obviously I completely agree with what Professor Chowdhury said. And I think pending these developments and pending the arrival of true gene-based therapies, I think people should be cautious in asking for genetic testing. And the reason being that many people think, oh, why not do a genetic test? Probably hoping it will be negative. And many people are not well prepared for the possibility that actually a genetic mutation is found. And now suddenly, instead of solving a problem, you've created a new one because you need to counsel family members, and there's all sorts of debates. What I would recommend is if you consider genetic testing, I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. What I'm saying is do proper genetic counseling beforehand and think carefully. Drawing blood is a piece of cake. Thinking carefully whether you should do it is another matter. And in our hospital, most people decline genetic testing after having been carefully counseled.
I agree with that totally. Absolutely true. It's same with us. We mustn't be carried away by this whole tranche of let's do lots of genes, because there's a myth about it, but we need to be realistic about what it actually will mean and the impact on the family, as Professor Bloem just said. Absolutely agree.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for those answers. They're, very comprehensive. It's exactly what we're hoping for tonight. And the idea tonight is that we don't address specific questions. We want everyone to get involved with providing answers if that's possible. So with that in mind, may I ask next question? Right. It's a very good question. Sorry, it's just shut down the page a little bit. Here we go. Can people with Parkinson's have the COVID vaccine without any side effects? Now, this one's quite relevant because the government's pushing ahead with its COVID vaccination. And from a technical point of view, if you wouldn't mind answering Baz and Ray, and from a perspective of having involvement with the community, Steve, if I could get your angle on that, whether or not the community has been invited to take part in the research trials. So if I can go with that question.
Sure, I'll give you my 5 pence worth, or 2 pence, and Professor Chowdhury can add. I think, first of all, we know very little about the vaccine formally yet. And there was a tweet by Professor Richard Horton, who is the editor-in-chief or former editor-in-chief for The Lancet, who said announcements about vaccines should be made following publications in peer-reviewed journals and not by pharma companies. And I completely agree with him. So I think until we have seen the literature and the actual peer-reviewed publications, I would be a little bit cautious in over-interpreting. So that's my first remark. Having said that, and listening to the experts in the field, I'm quite certain that no vaccine will be allowed onto the market without being properly tested and having passed all the usual hurdles for being admitted to the market. And then in a generic sense, again, without knowing anything in detail about COVID vaccine, I think Parkinson patients should try to avoid any risk of additional concurrent disease. I increasingly liken Parkinson's to elite sportsmen, and the differences between elite sportsmen are minute. And the one who wins the gold medal in the Olympics has the diet right, has reduced stress, sleeps well. So all the environmental circumstances are optimized to get the best result. Now you've got Parkinson's. Now you want to optimize everything in your world to get the best personal result. Mitigating the risk of the flu, so getting the flu shot, is critical for people with Parkinson's. I recommend it to all my patients. And if, and again, I don't know, but if the vaccine is safe and published and peer reviewed, I would recommend people taking the vaccine because you want to optimize your circumstances. COVID, from what we've seen, is a nasty virus. It has neurotropic effects. It may even further harm areas in the brain already involved in Parkinson's. It affects the respiratory system, so we know that mortality risk for people with late-stage Parkinson's may be increased. I think Professor Chowdhury was on a paper to show this. So if you can mitigate the risk of becoming infected with COVID-19, please do. But let's await the formal publications.
Yeah, I think I've little to add to that, really, from Professor Bloem. So as Professor Bloem mentioned, we published a series of cases right at the beginning. It came out in May. And we did see that those with advanced disease, who might be on advanced therapies, but had a very high frailty index, which is the index you can measure of your frailty. In other words, issues related to mobility, to bone, to osteoporosis, body weight. And if it's associated with comorbidities, in other words, if there is diabetes or high blood pressure associated, then the COVID can be very dangerous indeed. Many of our patients went on to need ventilation or BiPAP, and some specifically had difficulty waking after the ventilation, but they did. And many of them, we're now following many of these people up, they have been afflicted with very, very severe fatigue, which is, post-viral fatigue is a pretty well-known phenomenon. We knew that happened after the Spanish influenza in 1918. And as Baz just said, the neurotropism of this virus might particularly predispose one to it. So one should be very careful. But again, I would absolutely echo the same point. Vaccines will only be recommended only after one is pretty happy that they're safe, passed through all the usual safety net, rather than media and companies putting them forward. And then if they are, then I would think that this particular subset of Parkinson's, people with Parkinson's, should be eligible for vaccination. And we need to do the safety sort of risk assessment and so on. And I would again add one other fact, working in an area of London where there's a high percentage of what in the UK we refer to as BAME population, Black and minority ethnic, who do have a high risk of having had COVID and dying from it. We know that data from NHS England. That's another group we need to probably prioritize. But these are events that we will have to wait and see.
And just if I can, I mean, I don't have much to add to this at all. I mean, as a charity, we will be listening to the likes of Ray and Baz and getting our advice from the clinical community about what is appropriate for people with Parkinson's. We'll be campaigning to make sure that people who really need those vaccinations are able to access it. And we'll be keeping up to speed with the emerging information as bigger studies, more information comes to light, so that we can ensure that we are kind of authoritative on the topic.
Thank you so much. And just a reminder for the viewers out there, if we don't get time to answer your questions, we will get back to you. So, we do take your questions seriously and we'd very much like to answer them. So if there's any particular questions that we don't get around to answering tonight, we'd certainly like to do that for you. Steve, if I can jump back on you again, sir. Um, ooh, 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 ooh. Tell me about your personal fundraising achievements.
Yeah, I wonder what was behind that question. Well, I do remember a number of years ago, probably the scariest thing I've ever done, I think, jumping out of a plane, and yeah, raising quite a bit of money for the charity. But I mean, I think it's a great question because Parkinson's UK is completely funded by donations. So a key part of my job is in encouraging volunteering, getting involved in fundraising events, but also I spend a lot of my time trying to persuade, inspire wealthy individuals, charitable trusts to support the charity's work. So it's it's a big aspect of my role.
Thank you, Steve. Baz, if I may come to you with a question that came in prior to tonight's event. It came in when we were advertising that we were having you online. Please explain your views on the widespread exposure to herbicides, solvents, and toxic chemicals used in agriculture and manufacturing, and the link they may have towards developing Parkinson's.
Yes, I think this is a very disconcerting development. There's a survey called the Global Survey of Diseases, which monitors the numbers of new patients with diseases of neurological sorts across the world. So it's not focused on Parkinson's in particular. And what you see is that, for example, well, all diseases become more prevalent because we grow older. But if you look at Alzheimer's, for example, it's growing, but if you correct for the aging effect, if you correct for the fact that we all become older, Alzheimer's actually stabilizes or maybe diminishes a little bit because we're better at preventing this. Stroke is actually diminishing quite a bit because we're better at preventing stroke. Out of all the neurological conditions in the world, one really stood out, and that was Parkinson's disease, that was really growing fast over and above the aging effect. Now, that's obviously not because there's a new gene around. We think this is related to exposure to environmental toxins, herbicides, pesticides, but heavy metals, solvents like trichloroethylene. From all of these chemicals, we know, A, that if you provide them to an animal, a rodent, they develop Parkinsonism clinically. It kills off the neurons in the brain that are involved in Parkinson's pathophysiology. We know that these are abundant in the world. Pesticides, for example, have been introduced worldwide after World War II to feed a fast-growing world population. Paraquat and rotenone are known animal models for Parkinson's, and these have been used for years and years in our environment. And even banned pesticides stay in the environment, in the surface, in groundwater. And I've just spoken to a real expert in this field, and what is truly worrisome is that many of these pesticides that we're currently using have never been tested for toxicity for Parkinson's areas in the brain. B, if they have been tested, they've only been tested in isolation, but the reality is that people are usually exposed to cocktails where one pesticide may kill off the microbiome in the gut, thereby facilitating the road to the brain for the second chemical. And the third reason is many of these chemicals are in the soil, and when a farmer drives around, it dissolves in the air, and people then breathe the pesticides, which makes them way more toxic than when it enters your gut because it's detoxified by the liver. So the epidemiological evidence, the animal work, and the data of the fast-growing Parkinson pandemic, as we've called it, I think are highly disconcerting. And looking, for example, at Steve Ford and the charity, I think we should raise a very powerful voice together to governments, to societies, to make sure that any existing toxic compounds are immediately banned, that there will be a much tighter regulation for new compounds to be released on the market, that farmers and other people should take protective measures to protect themselves, and the way that the time to passively lean backward and hope that things will solve themselves is over. Action is needed, and it's needed now.
Thank you, Baz. if I can remind the viewers of a very important topic, that they're very challenging times for us at this present. With the continued regional lockdowns, uncertainty about the effects on businesses and jobs, restrictions of activities, social distancing rules, etc., it's likely to cause a lot of anxiety and stress to our community. With more reliance on the helplines available and the need to continue support wherever possible, this all has a tremendous reliance on the funds that are available. As we all know, the lockdown period and subsequent localized lockdowns has affected those of us who have planned fundraising activities, whether that be running marathons, cycling events, so on and so forth, jumping out of a plane, parachuting. You know, we've missed the summer, which are the particular strong months for funds coming in. That's the time when most of the major contributions to the charities happen. It's important to remember that this has a huge effect on the charities who rely on these funds to provide the ongoing services that benefit all of us. I therefore ask you to kindly consider offering a donation to Parkinson's UK to enable the charity to continue to offer its essential services for us all. At this moment in time, there should be a description on tonight's event, or I believe it should also be on your screen. Professor Ray, if we can come to you, please. What's your view on personalized medicine?
Yeah, thank you for that. So I actually think this is the future. In fact, we've already addressed it. You know, some of the comments that both Steve made and Bloem made actually alludes to personalized medicine. My particular view on it, and we've sort of written about it, really relates to having two aspects. One is a person-specific aspect of it. So personalized medicine should be addressing the person's specific needs. And one of the big problems I've had, I think I personally had with Parkinson, is the concept that for many long time people used to think one size fits all. And you know, you have these guideline-based treatments, but it's very clear that a drug that might be perfectly okay for person A might have real problems in person B. And so individualizing treatment for each person as much as possible and providing each one based on their scorecard, if you will, is, I think, a really good way to go forward. And we do that for many other conditions already. But in addition to it, I think the personalized medicine also includes, for me, some external pivots. And these are things like personality, body weight, lifestyle, ethnicity, and perhaps also considering the genetics, pharmacogenetics angle, and age, of course, because these will make some treatments relevant, others not. And I give you another example. For instance, pharmaceutical companies would often license a drug based on an average body mass index of a subject, usually in a Western country. Now, that particular dosing of the drug may not be relevant or may be too much in some other countries with lower body mass subjects. So that's why countries like perhaps Japan and some of the East Asian countries would have to run their own registration studies. So there are these differences that we need to think about. So personalized medicine really takes all of these issues into account. On one side, you decide on therapy based on the person's clinical phenotype, and then you add those external factors, take all of that into consideration, and then provide the treatment. So that would be my sort of take on it.
Fantastic, thank you so much. Steve, if we can come to you, please. Is it correct that the charity is going through its second rebrand in 10 years?
No, we're not doing that. I mean, we went through a rebrand in 2010, which which was incredibly successful actually, and again really driven by people with Parkinson's. You know, we don't like the word disease, we don't like the word society, which is old-fashioned, but also, you know, we want the charity to be a movement of people affected by Parkinson's that, you know, that really kind of amplifies our voice as a community. And I think, you know, Parkinson's UK started to do that. But like all brands, you know, you don't stand still. That, you know, I think what happened in 2010 was perhaps we were a bit kind of, you know, we want to maintain the integrity of the brand, and we didn't really let people experiment with it and do different, and you know, 10 years later we need to kind of tweak it a bit. So last year we made a few changes. People will see that, you know, hopefully everything that we produce still looks like it's visibly Parkinson's UK. The language is similar, but we've just updated it, and so it's not been a major investment. And you know, I wouldn't want people to be kind of anxious about that. You know, I think all brands need to be constantly updating as the world around them changes.
Thanks, Steve. Professor Baz, questions come in. I am interested in your thoughts regarding amalgam tooth fillings. Do you think that leak in mercury can contribute to problems with neurological conditions?
Well, I have to say that I had to read up on this, which is probably a sign. I'm seeing Professor Chaudhuri laugh, which is somewhat of a reassurance, because he seems to know everything. I had to read up, in all fairness, which probably means it's not a topic of hot debate in our field. Otherwise, I would have known off the top of my heart. I can say that, and this is a personal story, I used to have a girlfriend whose father was a dentist, and he actually coupled me to his daughter because he felt that dental fillings were the cause of Parkinson's, and he needed a son-in-law to prove his point. And he loaded me with literature, which was actually quite interesting. If you put an amalgam filling in a sheep, the mercury, through axonal transport, the root canals, will actually find its way into the brain, hit precisely the areas in the brain involved in Parkinson's, and cause so-called oxidative stress, like rust on metal. Now, that's not to say that amalgam fillings are causing Parkinson's, but I found that very persuasive, that this happens in animals. There are a few so-called case control studies, which from an epidemiological standpoint is not the strongest case, that have shown inconsistent and often weak associations between amalgam fillings and the risk of Parkinson's. The problem being that you have to rely on history taking. Does any one of you recollect when your dental filling was placed and for how long you've had it? People with more dental fillings probably also have different types of care. So there's all sorts of confounders here. And I think it is safe to say that there is no convincing evidence as of yet. I might add in passing that one neglected area, if we're talking about multidisciplinary care, is the role of the dentist. And we know that because of poor saliva control, oral health is an issue in Parkinson's, and it's neglected. In our Parkinson Net multidisciplinary conferences, we now have dentists speaking to us. And it's amazing. I see Steve Ford nodding, and maybe he wants to chime in, but I think oral hygiene has been underestimated. Malnutrition is an issue. People sometimes don't dare to eat because their teeth are so bad. So I wouldn't worry too much about dental fillings. I would worry about your oral health. And Steve, please help me here if you can.
No, I'm nothing clever to say. I was just nodding because I think it's just you just make another really important point about how multidisciplinary Parkinson's care needs to be. That every health professional has got some kind of contribution to make to this, and the challenge therefore that we have of making sure that people get access to that full range of multidisciplinary expertise.
As a person
I've nothing to add really. I think Baz and Steve has covered everything, but again, I would just endorse the multidisciplinary aspect. It's so important that dentistry is actually really important in Parkinson's, and we should always have this as a routine care, but in many cases it's not happening. So it really is an important issue.
Thank you, Ray. As a person with Parkinson's, I totally agree with everything that's been said. The importance of dental and oral hygiene. One thing from my personal perspective that I've noticed, as well as a lot of people I speak to who've got Parkinson's or had Parkinson's for a long time, is that the teeth can erode or become softer or more brittle. So I believe it's certainly something that should be allowed into the multidisciplinary team approach. Another question that's come in. Why do you think people with Parkinson's tend to overthink things? And Professor Ray, you're on the screen, so I'll ask you.
This is a difficult one, and I think there are several possibilities, shall we say, but again, I'm not speaking with a neuropsychology hat, and again, I'd be interested in what Professor Bloem and Steve thinks about this. I think in one aspect, there's a general feeling that people with Parkinson's tend to be more of a slightly obsessional compulsive personalities that sort of lends itself to, it has been shown in several epidemiological studies that such people might have a higher chance of developing Parkinson's, for instance. So if you have that personality, then you're likely to overanalyze things, and compounded by anxiety and the other issues that can go with symptoms of Parkinson's itself. But what we also showed, this is in working with my colleague Richard Brown here, who's a very well-known neuropsychologist in the field of Parkinson's, that he showed in a piece of work with us, there's a phenomenon called metacognitions that happens in Parkinson's specifically. And this is when you can anticipate, let's say if you're fluctuating, if a person with Parkinson fluctuates, they're on and they're off. On periods are very good, but off periods, they really hate. You don't like the feeling of going off. You don't like the stiffness or the mental clouding or the dribbling of saliva or sweating, whatever might happen at that period. You fear that so much that you can turn yourself off just by thinking about it. And this phenomenon of metacognition is, again, particularly prevalent and particularly common in certain groups of Parkinson's, and adds another impetus to how important it is to have a multidisciplinary setup where you also have an input from a neuropsychology backup, but also to identify such people who might be by nature overanalyzing or over-anxious about things. So those would be the possibilities. I don't think it happens in everybody, but there is a subgroup of people where there is certainly this issue about, and it sort of blends with the concept of anxiety as well, which we know is highly prevalent in Parkinson's.
Thank you, Professor Ray. Professor Baz, can I come to you? There's a two-stage question here, if I may put this to you. My best friend was diagnosed with Parkinson's in March. She was previously diagnosed with colitis, then vasculitis. Is there a connection? The second part of the question, my friend's mum had motor neuron. Is there a connection?
Right. So another area that I think is hugely neglected is comorbidity. But let me address pre-morbid conditions first. And colitis is really interesting because I think one of the hottest topics in the field of Parkinson's is the gut-brain axis, the relationship between the gut and the brain. Now, that's not necessarily inflammatory bowel diseases. It's more of constipation, bacterial overgrowth, changes in the gut's microbiota. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think colitis has been very consistently associated as a pre-morbid feature of Parkinson's. I'm quite certain that motor neuron disease per se is not associated with Parkinson's disease pure. We know that some tauopathies, for example, frontal temporal dementia, can lead to Parkinsonian signs as well as signs of motor neuron disease. In fact, ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, horrible condition, can lead to motor neuron symptoms, but actually can also affect pigmented areas in the brain and lead to some Parkinsonian signs. So there may also be some spurious relationships outside of Parkinson's disease. I think in a more general term, What we really need more awareness for is comorbid conditions, a second condition next to Parkinson's. Most people live with Parkinson's for 2, 3, up to 4 decades. You know, fortunately, it's not an immediately lethal condition. So people live with this for a long time, and Parkinson's doesn't protect you from developing other conditions. And it's largely neglected, because what I commonly see is that people have a sore knee and people say, oh, it's probably my Parkinson's, and leave it. Whereas there's an amenable problem maybe in their knee, which is completely unrelated to Parkinson's. So don't automatically assume that all your complaints are due to Parkinson's, and always be critical. And if in doubt, ask your GP if it's still Parkinson's or perhaps something else.
Thank you. Thanks.
I think can I just add to that? I think what's really exciting now is the availability of really big data sets. You know, you have records of people's medical health records that can be analysed, the way we can use artificial intelligence and other approaches around that, I think do enable us to make some of those associations better, but also in terms of identifying potential treatments as well. If people who've been on a treatment for one condition are less likely to develop Parkinson's, or you know, then you know, let's understand what's in that and whether that can lead to some exciting research insights.
I think we're in a very exciting time now, Steve, as well, where what's available to us now with regards to AI and data sets, that wasn't around, you know, 15, 20 years ago. And there's been a massive paradigm shift in what's available now, not only for research, but to take to, you know, to universities, to people who do studies and research. I think, you know, it's from a person with Parkinson's perspective, you know, I'd rather be here now than 10 years ago.
Can I have the privilege to introduce my friend, Professor Chaudhuri? I gave a plenary lecture at the Movement Disorder Society, and I literally called his paper in Nature on the typing behavior one of the best, if not the best paper I've read in the field in a long time. So Ray, I think you deserve credits for that wonderful study, which uses AI and deep learning and the typing behavior. I think that's worth sharing with the people here.
Thank you for that. Yes, I mean, you're right in that we have become more AI enabled, and again, I think we are having a mutual appreciation society. I would have to say some of the work that Bloem is doing and his group, working on gait, looking at falls, prediction of falls, is also really leading the way. And I think we will see a real revolution, I believe, in the next few years, when our care will become more objective, but also will be able to be delivered remotely and community enabled to be delivered at home. And a lot of this can be based on the AI capacity we have, but also the predictive value, which is the paper that Bloem just alluded to. And that might become really important, that we could have paradigms that might enable us to describe risks in people with Parkinson's. And we are working on that field just at this very moment.
Thank you so much. No particular order. The next question, I think we've actually answered that, so I'll come back to one for Steve, if I may. Parkinson's UK have invested 11 million into the virtual biotech up to 2020. What has this actually delivered for the patient?
Yeah, I guess the use of the word "actually" there suggests that there's a kind of fear. I mean, you know, let's look at all of the millions that have been spent on Parkinson's research by everybody across the world, and say, you know, what has this delivered in terms of the kind of new treatments that people desperately need. So it's, you know, I think we need to recognise this is a really kind of difficult area to get those new treatments. But as I said right at the beginning in the kind of introduction, I think this approach is allowing us to pick some really promising new potential treatments and advance them more rapidly. So, you know, if people want to have a look on our website, you'll see there's a portfolio of a range of different projects. We've just over the last couple of days announced a partnership with the Michael J. Fox Foundation for around a new drug that is looking to deal with dyskinesia, which, you know, a really troubling symptom for many people. We've got other projects, you know, which are earlier, looking at potentially disease modifying treatments and how can we get them to a stage where we could do the first in human clinical trials of those. We're running trials looking at issues of hallucinations, delusions in Parkinson's as well. So, you know, I really hope that through the money we're investing, we will see a new treatment. We've said as a charity, we want our funding to have led to a new significant treatment by the end of this strategy, 2024. So that's what we're working towards, but it's going to be really challenging. And, you know, we need to recognize that most research money fails. I mean, it might give us learning and give us insight, but most research doesn't lead to the promising treatments we want to see.
I'll throw this one out there to whoever would like to answer it. Do you think people should be able to self-medicate if they are well enough and understand the condition well enough?
Presumably you mean in hospital?
Yeah. I know the Parkinson's UK have the Get It On Time campaign, but from a perspective of somebody knowing their own medication regime, knowing when they need to take it, knowing when they don't need to take it, should that be allowed rather than your tablets left at the door for the medicine delivery to come around, you know, 2 hours later or whatever?
I mean, I think, you know, if I can answer that, I'm sure Ray and Baz will have questions. Is, you know, how insulting must that be when you are so used to managing your medication and, you know, you go into hospital and it's taken away and you know, you have it when it's given to you and when it's convenient for the nurses, etc. Now, of course, it's more complex because people are in hospital because they're ill, and that might affect people's ability to do things. But as a principle, you know, we must be working towards a situation where people who are confident and have been assessed as being confident to self-medicate should be able to do that. That seems a really important human right to me, actually.
I mean, if I can come to that, actually, because again, I'm not sure what's the setup as at your unit or hospital, but probably would be similar. But we are very strong followers of Get It On Time, and in fact, it's there on most of the wards. It's enabled by the nurse specialists and the physicians quite a bit. But the problem arises when, as Steve said, when somebody arrives in an acute ward, acutely ill with something else, and they follow the general flow of management where, because we've become so health and safety conscious, you know, giving drugs through through an administrative setup is the norm. And I think we need to have that pragmatic decision-making process that, you know, person with Parkinson is probably best judged to know when they need the medications, and they usually will do the right decision, unless you decide that the person maybe not cognitively or otherwise may not be able to do so. So I'd very much support what Steve said, and I think we should try and roll that out as much as possible. But I'm not sure how many hospitals have that explicit policy unless you have a local champion who propagates that view. And I think it's really important that we do so.
Thanks, Ray. Professor Baz, do you have that similar ability across in the Netherlands?
No, not much. I was inspired by a study done in Minnesota in the United States, where they used EPIC, the electronic health record, to provide systematic alerts to people admitted to non-neurological wards about the importance of medication on time, and the outcome was way better if you implemented that system, which is all automatized. And you know, when people are on a neurology ward, in particular in a specialized Parkinson center, I'm sure that at King's things will be okay. The problem is the moment you're admitted for a knee surgery, And
Sure.
this is not to say that the nurses aren't kind and experts in knees, but things go wrong the moment people are admitted. And I always tell my patients, the unfair thing about Parkinson's is it's easy to derail, but it takes ages before you get back on track. So anything we can do, again, it comes back to this metaphor of elite sportsmen. You want to optimize all the environmental circumstances, and medication on time is a key element of that. And I think electronic health records can play a role in this.
As part of the multidisciplinary care team, does anyone feel that like a life coach could be helpful as part of that team? And Professor Baz, you're on my screen, so I'll ask you first.
No, so we've done we've published a paper called The Voice of the Parkinson Customer, which is really worth reading. It's in Journal of Parkinson's Disease. And we asked people with Parkinson's, as Parkinson's UK is regularly doing, about their wishes and needs. But it's a real deep interviewing method where you try to arrive at the core needs of your patients. And what people with Parkinson's said is, give us one point of access, one person who is easily accessible, who can answer questions immediately, or tell us which other person in the healthcare team is best equipped to answer that question. People think healthcare is like a jungle and they get lost very regularly. And we're now doing an experiment in conjunction with Dr. Emily Henderson in Bristol and Bath, as well as a branch in the Netherlands, to field test what happens if you introduce extra nurses into healthcare who can take on that role as the primary point of access. Again, to address questions, to coordinate the team, and to tell people where to go and who is the best person for that particular question. And it also relates to, so I'll just give you two quick examples. Sometimes people wait for 3-6 months to come to my clinic, and here they are, and they tell me I'm lonely. And I think, well, A, that's horrible, and B, I'm not the right person to help you on loneliness issues. There are other people in my team way better for this. So if you had a person to do triage, I think the key word is triage, early on, and navigate people to the right person in the team for that particular question, you save time and you gain quality of life. And I've seen people also with a sore knee came to my clinic, thought it was Parkinson's, and then it was just the meniscus problems, and they needed an orthopedic surgeon. So that question, I'm not sure who raised it. I think that is going to be a key person in healthcare, and we're trying to provide some evidence for that in an experiment in England as well as in the Netherlands.
Thank you, Professor Baz. Right, we've just passed the top of the hour, and obviously these gentlemen have got a lot of busy times ahead, not only with the COVID, but with the increased numbers of Parkinson's, which is the fastest growing neurological condition at this moment in time. I'd like to personally thank Professor Baz Bloem, Professor Ray Chowdhury, Steve Ford, the CEO of Parkinson's UK, and
Can make me a professor as well, just for the night. Feel left out. You know. Let me be a professor too.
So with my thanks, and I'm sure with all of the viewers' thanks for your time given tonight, it just leaves us with a couple of things to say. Please remember that they're very challenging times for us all, with the continued lockdown, uncertainty about the effects on businesses and jobs, restriction of activities, the social distancing rules, etc., causing anxiety and stress to our community. There's a lot more reliance on the helplines down at Parkinson's UK, and the need to continue support wherever possible. It's got a tremendous reliance on the funds that are available. As we all know, the lockdown period has significantly affected those of us who have planned fundraising activities, be it run a marathon, cycling events, most of the major contributions to charities, etc. It's important to remember that this has a huge impact on the charities who rely on these funds to provide these vital ongoing services for us all. I therefore ask you kindly, please consider offering a donation to Parkinson's UK to enable the charity to continue its offering those essential services for us all. And there should be a link which you can follow on the screen. If not, it'll be in the tonight's event description. So it leaves us with one last thing. Steve, I hope you don't mind us saying, but you are off to pastures new. We'd like to wish you all the very best. Oh, you've frozen on us. We would certainly like to wish you all the very best in your new voyage ahead, wherever that may be. And I'm sure that Professor Baz and Professor Ray Chowdhury would also like to wish you the very best as well.
Absolutely. Thank you, Steve, for all your work.
Amazing inspiration to the field. Magnificent contributions. We'll stay friends forever, I hope.
Here, yeah. Same for me.
I think we've lost him. So thank you, gentlemen, very much for your time, which is carried out in your own time. It's been fantastic to be tonight's host. And, you know, may you go from strength to strength in your fields. And your dedication to the Parkinson's community is very much, you know, heartfelt. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us. Thanks for having
us.
Thank
right.
you. Bye.
And stay safe.
Thank
Stay
you.
safe.
Yes.
Bye.
Stay safe.
Bye.
Sorry, I lost my connection, but I'm so bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. That was great.
We'll stay in touch.
Yeah, we will definitely. Thank you. See you.